Welcome back to the DentalFit Podcast, the show where we explore powerful connection between fitness, health, and personal grit. My name is Mark, and today's guest is Rachel Smith, a CrossFit athlete, medical doctor, and someone about to take on the challenge that very few humans ever will, summiting Mount Vinson, the highest peak in Antarctica. Rachel's doing this not just for herself, but as a beacon for people living with type 1 diabetes. We'll talk climbing, CrossFit, insulin pumps, altitude adaptation, and how she plans to keep up with her dental hygiene. Yes, even flossing at sub-zero temperatures. Let's dive in. Let's just get straight into it. So, hi Rachel.
Hello.
Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So you're about to be the first woman with type 1 diabetes to summit Mount Vinson, which is the tallest peak in Antarctica. How excited are you for this upcoming climb?
Yeah, I'm very excited. It's been a long time to get to this point. A lot of work's went in the background. But yeah, I'm very excited about the year ahead and all the ups and downs that's going to come with it.
And how long does this trip take? Like, tell me a bit more.
Yeah, so it's a 2-week expedition, and it involves a bit of travel time either side, and because of the Antarctic weather and very amenable to high winds and very kind of whiteouts as well. So there's a few contingency days in there, but yeah, 2 weeks of
2 weeks, my goodness. So it's not a day trip.
No.
It's not your weekend hike.
No.
Okay.
A bit more than that.
A bit more than that. And what's your training like at the moment? And how does it look leading up to the climbs? Like, what are you doing at the moment to train?
Yes, so at the minute I'm just working on building up like strength and endurance. So that's kind of evolving about 5 to 6 days a week, split between interval running and building up fitness in the gym, which I'm predominantly doing in CrossFit at the minute.
Yep.
As we come towards the winter months, I'm going to get out into the hills and refresh my snow and ice skills, which will be really important in Antarctica. And I think a huge thing that sometimes goes unnoticed in these kind of lead ups is the mental side of things as well.
Okay.
So spending quite a bit of time preparing mentally is something I will do, especially in the months later on in the year.
So what are some of the exercises, I guess, you're doing at the moment as part of your strength block to sort of simulate some of the things that you'll be doing up there?
Yeah. So I suppose from a running point of view, just building up that endurance, endurance kind of side of things, kind of getting more towards like half marathon distances and working for quite a bit of time. When it comes to the gym, just building up in general, like kind of strength stuff, like squats, pitch press, that kind of stuff, conditioning work.
So you're doing all the barbell work. Like that's all the same. Yeah,
and then there'll be some more like strength specific stuff that I will start incorporating into my training, such as sled pulls and sled pushes, because part of the expedition actually involves pulling a heavy sled from the base camp to the low camp. So there'll be a couple of days of pulling heavy weight behind us. So getting that kind of strength specific simulation in the gym closer to the time will be
what's
important.
That distance from
I think it's about 1,000 vertical meters, but it'll probably end up being about 8 hours of pulling. Yeah.
8 hour sled
8 hour
push.
days.
Okay, program that into your into your weekend workout. And is there any way to simulate the actual high altitude training? Like, do you do anything to simulate that specifically once you get to the higher altitudes? Yeah,
that's a hard one to mimic unless there are some ways you can do it, kind of like hyperbaric training and stuff like that. Which it kind of more comes into play when you're kind of going more towards like the 8,000 meter distances, elevations plus. So a lot of most of the altitude training kind of actually comes on the mountain itself, when you just have to build in a very solid acclimatization process, which involves like climbing high and sleeping low. So we'll kind of do rotations. So we'll climb up to say camp 1, stay there for a few hours to get the benefits of the altitude, come back down and sleep where there's more oxygen and we can recover better. Having experienced altitude before, I'm fortunate to kind of know roughly how my body adapts to altitude, which will be invaluable and help me a lot kind of on Vincent as well.
And what I guess, like, you say being there before that gives you the best experience, but what's it actually like up there on the top? Like, is it like doing Fran? For those who don't know, Fran's a very bad CrossFit workout where you get something called Fran lung, but is it like, what's it like?
It's hard to put into words. It's shortness of breath and heart racing like I've never felt before. My probably best analogy, or probably the time I felt it the most, was last January on the summit of Aconcagua. Aconcagua is the highest mountain in the world outside of Asia, the highest mountain in South America. It sits at just under 7,000 meters. So the summit night climbed from about 6,000 meters to just under 7,000 meters on that last night. Every step was incredibly difficult. You had to take every step. You kind of had to take 2 or 3 breaths to even recover to take the step after that. And any time you were kind of even static for 10 seconds, then your body started to work again. That sudden rise in heart rate makes you feel so sick, coupled with the shortness of breath. So had a few vomits and a few like twitchy moments, but it's another Saturday night. Yeah. Oh my goodness. It's kind of like Fran, but you can't stop.
Yeah, so there you go, CrossFitters. It's worse than Fran. You heard it here first. So you've been very open about type 1 diabetes and how you've been diagnosed at a young age. Why is it so personal for you, this climb?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. It's definitely a big reason why I've even got to the point of doing this climb. Having diabetes from such a young age, and I was the first child in Northern Ireland to go on the insulin pump, which made a huge difference to my day-to-day life. And I think growing up with type 1 diabetes, it kind of creates that extra caution, and it's something that can be perceived as holding people back and holding you back. And I've always been the type of person that has not wanted that to be the case. So I think kind of growing up with type 1 diabetes and then kind of adding that personal element to it, I don't know, I feel like I've been able to develop high level of resilience, determination, like motivation. My why I'm doing it becomes that bit stronger. And I also I want to represent people with type 1 who probably have also faced many times in their lives of being told that they can't do something, to kind of turn that into something positive and realize that they definitely can.
And Mum did mention that you've always been determined, and so naturally, like, all that competitive drive would have come out of that. And she does mention that your love of life, like, is fueling your mission to break these barriers with that people may think about having and living with type 1 diabetes. So it's funny that, she's mentioned when you suggested to her that you were going to do this climb, very soon after you just finished your previous climb.
Correct.
Her words to you were, be safe. You tell us a bit about like that relationship and that interaction, and then how much like that means to you going into the climb.
I think I started getting into high altitude climbing when I was 19, which was back in 2016, quite a while ago. And I think at that point, my mum and dad both were definitely probably a bit more cautious at that time, and probably had more of those, so maybe like kind of sentences of, well, maybe you shouldn't do this. Once I had done that and then kind of didn't really stop, I think at this point they know I'm going to do it anyway. So their approach has been to, how can I help you and how can I support you, rather than you shouldn't do this, because they know I'm going to do it anyway. So that's been that's been incredibly helpful and definitely a massive reason why I've been able to get to this point, and I'm definitely incredibly appreciative.
And your dad was sort of able to, you mentioned insulin pump therapy, and you were the first in Northern Ireland to receive that, and your dad had a role to play in that in terms of how he came across it.
Yeah, so there is. Mum and dad were both my dad's very into golf, so they were, I think, watching one of those big golf tournaments. I'm going to say the PGA Tour, but correct me if I'm wrong. And there was a golfer who was playing like live on TV called Scott Verplank, who was type 1 diabetic, and he had an insulin pump like visible when he was playing. Yeah. And at that point, I'd been diagnosed maybe only a few months at that point, and there wasn't really much in the way of that kind of technology for in general, but especially for children. So kind of off the back of seeing him playing with the insulin pump, they went and did quite a bit of their own research and looked up a lot of papers and the benefits and all the rest of it, and brought it to my pediatrician in the local hospital, which was Ulster Hospital at the time, to see if he would agree to put me on the insulin pump to trial it, because the insulin regime was extremely restrictive and very fixed and not like a lifestyle you'd want for any child. So yeah, thankfully the doctor that they took the research to approved, and here we are. And
can you explain a bit more about what insulin pump therapy is, just for those who don't know?
So probably the easiest way to explain, well, even just to explain diabetes in general, is that my body doesn't produce a hormone called insulin, and we need insulin to, use the energy in our food. The basic one of the most common therapies is just multiple daily injections. When I was diagnosed, I was on a regime called fixed daily injections, which was when you had a fixed amount of insulin for a fixed amount of carbohydrates at fixed times of the day. The insulin pump is a massive step up from that. So essentially it's the equivalent of one injection every 3 days, and you have a lot more flexibility over the amount of insulin you can give, the times that you can give, and it has features like being able to adjust your background insulin, so you can increase it, decrease it for things like exercise to avoid those extremes of glucose control, which just makes a huge difference to being able to live a lot.
Because your glucose is fluctuating with everything that you do. Tell us a bit about some of the daily challenges that you face with either just eating, sleeping, training, and the effects it does have, so that we can get an understanding of exactly how much fluctuation actually occurs.
Yeah, and it's been interesting to kind of delving into this a little bit more, because it's something that I, at this point, just most of the time just do automatically. Yep. But your glucose levels are affected by literally every single thing that we do. So from how much we sleep, what is our mood, are we anxious, what training are we going to do, what type of training is it, cardio versus weights, do we have anything particularly stressful on that day? There's just so many things that can influence our blood sugars that we don't really think about, and my brain's kind of constantly working in the background trying to figure things out and trying to kind of plan and problem solve kind of day to day. So even for example, coming on this podcast, I'm having to think early from even last night, what am I going to eat today, when am I going to train, what's my glucose doing before I even sit down here, what's it going to do after. I think there's a bit of research that suggests that people with type 1 diabetes make on average 180 extra decisions a day, and I can absolutely say that that's true.
Oh my god, that is so. So insulin is kind of your, especially while you're doing the climb, it's going to be your battery pack. Yeah. It's going to be your. So how do you manage that in the extreme conditions when you've got to take 2 weeks on a climb? How are you managing that?
Yeah, so preparation ahead of time is one of the biggest things, and learning from previous expeditions. I'll have backups of everything from sensors to insulin pumps to insulin pens. One of the main things about hiking and mountaineering in very cold conditions and extreme environments is that insulin can't freeze, or if it freezes, it essentially becomes ineffective. So avoiding that situation in such a remote part of the world is one of probably the biggest thing to plan and think about ahead of time. How I do that is I store it in kind of temperature regulation packs. I keep it in my sleeping bag. I divide it up between different members of the team, put hand warmers against my skin. things like that. And then, in terms of how to manage that kind of on the mountain, just constantly having to adapt and check in, and also just trust my body, because it's not always easy to take gloves off in minus 30 degrees. So being able to feel and trust my body and how I feel, it's a huge thing as well.
So you're going a lot by feel, and your phone, you use your phone to sort of monitor glucose levels, and so what happens if your phone dies? How do you manage the phone battery?
The phone battery, again, having plenty of backup battery packs, and there's also little smaller sensor devices that you can use specifically for the different types of sensors, and then backups of manual testing strips as well.
All right, so I know it's less important than the insulin, but
it's still a big thing.
Yeah, we had to ask about the phone because and what are things that I guess most people don't know about living and training with type 1 diabetes? I think you touched early on like all the decisions you need to make, but like tell us more about like the day-to-day things, like a day in the life of tell me more about that. I think it's a hard question because it's so second nature to me at this point, but it definitely, when you say it out loud, it is pretty difficult. Like, it is pretty much the first thing I think about when I wake up and the last thing I think about when I go to bed, and quite often up during the night as well, like kind of making adjustments. If you wake up and your blood glucose is out of range, that kind of can set you up for a very difficult day before it's even started. What are some of the training considerations you're making if you do find that there's been this like something's out of whack? You just have to, again, a lot of it's just problem solving and adapting to a difficult situation, thinking about what type of training I'm going to be doing. If I'm going to be doing like cardio based training, my glucose is more likely to kind of dip down and get back in range. If I'm doing weight-based training, that extra adrenaline, cortisol just kind of keeps pushing it up. So the different types of training actually has a huge impact on what my glucose does, regardless of what my sugars are before or after, which is a big thing. And one of the big things is also just being kind to yourself. And if you have a bad day, just kind of putting it to one side and starting again tomorrow. I mean, there's a funny story from your friend Lauren who says that you know where Rachel's been based on how many or the trail of glucose monitors that are just left, and it's almost like a Rachel was here sign was just placed, and I think that's kind of funny. Just to lighten up the mood a bit. That was more so back in the day before pre sensors, where every test had to be like a manual one. Oh, that was that.
That was more back then. I've lived with Lauren for many years, so she remembers back in the day.
And so no one knows now.
It's not as much of a thing.
So tell us more about some of the other climbs. Aconcagua.
Yeah.
That's the one in Argentina. Mm-hmm. That's the most recent one.
Yeah.
And before that was?
I've done Kilimanjaro. And then I've done Le Boucher in Nepal as well. And then Kosciuszko in Australia.
So tell us a bit about those climbs. What were some of the highlights? What were some of the challenges?
Yeah. I think for those big climbs, I just love the feeling of altitude. As you get higher and you kind of, the air gets a bit thinner. It's a feeling and a situation that can't really be mimicked in any other part of life, and that's what excites me definitely the most, and probably is definitely a big reason why I want to kind of keep seeking out these bigger climbs. I say Aconcagua last year is probably one of the most memorable. It was a 3-week expedition, nearly 7,000 meters. A big achievement, and definitely a lot of, from the diabetes point of view, a few problems that were solved kind of as I went. Like, I had a pump failure at base camp, so then I had to use backups and all the rest of it, and then I don't know.
So you had a pump failure at base camp?
Yeah, I had a pump failure at base camp on Aconcagua last year, which was fine in the sense that I had a backup pump with me, so there was no physical. Did
that shake you up a little bit in that moment?
Yeah, it was a bit more of a mental kind of a mental shake for a couple of days, because I've never had anything like that before, and you have this kind of blind trust in technology. So having the reality check if that's not always the case is a good learning point, but also definitely shook me up a bit.
It sounds like you were able to overcome it though.
Yeah.
In a very short amount of time, and it didn't compromise the climb.
It didn't compromise the climb.
No. We can have an appreciation for, I guess, your love of the mountains and the love of that feeling that you get. And I guess this story from Maisie, your partner, did I pronounce that right?
Yeah.
She told us about something before your first date together. Can you just please explain a bit about what you did in the 24 hours leading up to that date?
I went to the Scottish Highlands. Munros in Scotland, I think, are mountains over 3,000 feet, I believe. And I undertook a short expedition to climb 7 of those peaks, peaks in a day. And it was amazing. It was incredible. No regrets.
It's clear you really, really love the mountains. And I was going to say maybe a first date would bring up those feelings and those butterflies, but clearly the mountains is where you belong.
Don't tell her that.
I won't. And what's the ultimate goal? Is there like a number of mountains that you want to conquer?
Good question. No, obviously the Mount Vinson is the highest mountain in Antarctica and is part of the wider 7 Summit Challenge. The 7 Summit Challenge is the highest mountains on each of the 7 continents, and it's a pretty well-known challenge within the mountaineering world. There's all kind of records within that. This will be my 4th of the 7, so I'd be quite keen to kind of continue with that challenge after this, and definitely see where it takes me.
And how important is it to have a strong team? And can you tell us a bit more about the team that's involved in supporting you in this climb? Yeah,
absolutely. And the team is everything, because there's no way I would even be sitting down here if it wasn't for those people that literally help me day to day. From having the first idea, speaking to my mum and dad and Maisie about it, 14, 15 months ago, and to have that security to know that it will be met with a positive reaction and yes, you can do this, rather than no, you can't, is incredible. So they're probably my 3 very close knit people, and then I have a team of also very close family and friends who I'm just constantly bouncing ideas off. People who even expanded, Josh doing videography, and they've got a couple of people on board doing things like a website and helping me with social media and things like that in the background. So it's just kind of it's growing and growing and growing, probably bigger than I even thought it would be. Oh, wow. And there's people in my team that I did not even think would be this time last year, which has also been so lovely. So feeling very appreciative and very loved. I
know you're a doctor, and weirdly enough, there's a ton of doctors at the gym. There's physios, there's dentists. I don't know what draws us into this field, but how do you balance medicine, training, and this expedition as well? Yeah,
and this is definitely something that I had to give quite a lot of thought to end of last year, because the contracts for the roster renew in February time, and I knew that I was going to dedicate a lot of this year to the expedition, and I would need more time because it's already difficult not without the expedition to juggle all those things. So I've decided to pull back my hours from February. So I've been doing part-time roster in my medical work, and then around that just trying to balance a mixture of training and then just spending pretty much all the free time I have either speaking to people or on calls or on my laptop, and just trying to do a lot of work in the background that's probably not as visible but hopefully will become apparent in the coming months.
And for those that don't know, what are some of the clinical challenges that you're facing, and how how does that impact your training or your day-to-day life, or even just this goal, some of those clinical challenges in your day-to-day practice?
Do you mean like in medicine? In medicine,
yes.
Yeah, so I suppose, and as you're probably aware, any kind of medical roster is a mixture of late shifts, day shifts, night shifts. So the pattern of shifts is all over the place, which is definitely one of the factors to consider. And even bringing back to the diabetes, how I have to train at different times of the day and then eat at different times of the day, that's quite difficult. I'm currently working in obstetrics and gynecology, so it's a very high-paced, high intense job, which I do love when I'm there. But yeah, there's no downtime in work or outside of work at the minute.
Oh my goodness. And I guess the other thing, while still in the health sector area, everyone is going to be wondering, how are you going to brush your teeth and floss while you're at altitude? So I don't know. I don't even know if toothpaste freezes but you would know better.
I'll do it in my tent.
So it's literally just you could easily just get it done. No bathroom. Nothing.
No bathroom. On previous expeditions, I've just brushed my teeth in the tent so that it wasn't too cold, it didn't freeze, and then just quickly open the tent door to spit it out.
Oh, see, it's
practical.
So there's no excuse for anyone, who says, "Oh, I haven't got time to brush and floss at nighttime." So
always time.
There's always time. Okay, and also some, I guess, might not know that. You'd obviously have to consume a lot of snacks while you're, I guess, on the climb. We now know that one of your favorite snacks is actually Tim Tams, which makes you way more relatable now.
Yeah. Very Australian now.
Very Australian. So what message, you're doing this for I guess, something bigger than yourself. So what message do you have for people living with type 1 diabetes, women especially, who might think something like this is out of reach?
Mm-hmm. And I think that is one of the main reasons why I want to do it. I kind of touched on this earlier, but one of it's quite common for diabetes to be met with a negative perception, and to be met with you can't do this or you shouldn't do this. And I genuinely, wholeheartedly believe that as a result of having type 1, I am more determined, more resilient, more adaptable. And I believe that I'm actually doing this climb as a result of having type 1 and the additional skills and skills and interpersonal, positive mindset that I've been able to gain from having it. So I want the message to be, can we flip the negative perceptions into something positive and think about what we can do as a result of these things rather than what we can't do, and letting your type 1 or whatever anyone's perceived adversity is actually be their strength and not their weakness.
So what are some of the challenges or the different challenges that you face at the lower altitudes versus the high altitudes?
Yeah, so it's a good question, and something that's obviously applicable to every big mountain. At the lower altitudes, the oxygen isn't as thin. I'm walking for long days at a time long hours at a time actually tends to drop my insulin requirements. And because the conditions are generally less severe, so warmer and less severe winds, I have the luxury of being able to, take up my phone and check my glucose a lot easier and make those adjustments a lot easier. Yeah. And I tend to eat quite a bit. As you go up the mountain, the oxygen saturation drops, there's less oxygen available. And as one of the body's responses to that is to kind of release the stress hormones, so release adrenaline and release cortisol, which in turn promotes sugar to be released into the bloodstream for energy. So I find that my glucose actually tends to creep up the higher I go up, and the challenge of not being able to test as readily, and not being able to get food and things like that as readily definitely poses challenges as well. So kind of appreciating ahead of time the mental side of things and the mental toll that then can take on a summit night when you're physically very challenged, and then you're having to like kind of problem solve as well. So.
And what made you, I guess, with all these challenges that you're telling me, like, what made you even want to climb a mountain to begin with?
Yeah. I've always been very active, and I've always been very adamant about not letting type 1 diabetes stop me from being active. I come from a very outdoorsy family, so spent quite a lot of weekends and days in the mountains as a child. The Mourne Mountains are the local mountains back home in Northern Ireland, so spent a lot of days being there and getting exposed, and just absolutely loved it. What got me into high altitude mountaineering was my first year of university, which I went to Queen's University in Belfast, and there was a poster on the wall of the Student Union that said climb Kilimanjaro for some charity, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of cool. And I'd heard that Cheryl Cole had done it recently in the year or two before. So I looked into it, I reached out, and it just sounded really exciting. So that was kind of me hooked in. And when I actually went to Kilimanjaro, I found that I actually coped with the altitude and the demands of doing a back-to-back days, back-to-back in the mountains actually quite well. And that just drew my love of it and kept going. And
then now, like, what brought you all the way over to Australia?
Yeah.
Down to the humble Richmond.
The humble Richmond, I know. Well, what's not to love? I suppose as a UK trained doctor, there's a lot of opportunities for us in Australia. So I was just really interested in the work, primarily actually in the medical side of things. Yeah. I'm pushing my career and seeing what else I could do here. I also liked that I was able to be close to New Zealand, so I've done a bit of mountaineering in New Zealand, and just completely fascinated by this part of the world and wanted to see what it has to offer, and it definitely hasn't disappointed.
And where are you training at the moment? Where are you doing your CrossFit training or any of your physical training?
Yeah, I'm currently doing my CrossFit training at CrossFit Hawthorne East, which is run by two of my good friends, Bella and Dylan, which has been a really good space and a really strong and supportive community, and have formed part of that team for sure that I've been talking about earlier, and have been a big part of my last year and a half to even get to this point.
And you just you haven't always done CrossFit. You've trained a bit in High Rocks, mm-hmm. and I think I remember Lauren, your friend, telling us you roped her into a High Rocks event.
I did.
Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so they kind of combined my love of CrossFit and running back in 2023, and roped my friend Lauren into doing same-sex pairs High Rocks event in Glasgow. We actually trained pretty hard for it, and we came away from that event with a ticket to the World Championships for High Rocks in 2023. Nice. So the two of us went down to Manchester and competed at the High Rocks Worlds, which was a humbling but incredibly it was amazing opportunity to compete with athletes of that level. Enjoying the crossover.
So how does training for CrossFit and High Rocks, how does that actually prepare you? How do those workouts and those different time domains actually mm-hmm. prepare you for what you face out on the climb?
Yeah. Especially in CrossFit, the short, high intensity workouts, they're obviously incredibly difficult, but they are short. So I suppose in comparison into the mountains, it's a good question. I'd say one of the main comparison, or one of the main strengths is even just building up that solid strength and fitness base. But also what I was saying before, when you're getting higher up in the mountain and every time you start, the heart rate just spikes straight back up, and you have that feeling of shortness of breath and palpitations. So I found that actually it's kind of like doing CrossFit, but over a prolonged period of time. So having exposure to that feeling and that level of high heart rate or tachycardia and shortness of breath in the mountains is just kind of transferable, but over a long period of time.
You can say the words.
Can I say them? Tachycardia and shortness of breath, hypoxia. it translates in that sense. It's kind of like you're getting the body used to having that level of intensity. But in the mountains, you just do it over a longer period of time.
Thank you, Rachel, for being on the show. If people want to support your cause and find out more, how can they do that?
Yeah, so I've got social media, Instagram, TikTok, and I've got a website, www.type1summit.com, which there'll be a bit more information and ways that you can get in touch. In terms of the climb and supporting that, obviously these kind of expeditions come with a huge cost, so I am actively seeking sponsorship from any brands or companies that feel like their values align with what I'm trying to achieve, and if anyone's interested in getting involved, please reach out. I'll also be raising money for Breakthrough T1D, who are one of the charities who funds a lot of the type 1 diabetes research, so if anyone's in a position to wants to support the charity, I'd also be incredibly grateful, and links will be on my social media.
Fantastic. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for
having me. And all the best for the climb.
Thank you.
Go smash it.